This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night. I am astounded that I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm at my friend's apartment, who lives in a really rough part of town. In a series of poor decisions, that night I decided to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what. I know, safe to say after a solid night of partying. Around 4 a.m., I was not in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decides that instead of staying the night at my friend's apartment, like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own apartment. My friend's apartment had two separate entrances and exits to the building, one in the back, unlit parking lot of the building, and one facing the street. They had two sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back of the apartment. Since my Uber would obviously arrive at the street, and the door in the front of the building locks itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realized I looked like the easiest target on the planet. I'm a small, petite female in my early 20s, and I can hardly stay upright. I'm using a street lamp to prop myself up, and not doing a good job at that either. The light was basically a beacon for any nearby predators saying, "Come get me." I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact that there was literally a bullet hole in the front door that I just came out of. Not good. I remember checking to see what car I was getting picked up in, and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon after stepping outside, a black sedan pulls up to the curb and starts rolling down the window, so I step forward. Before this man even spoke, I could feel something was wrong. He had an expression like he was tearing me apart with just his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a new meaning to the word predator to describe a criminal, because I then knew what it felt like to be prey. He basically barks at me, "I'm your Uber driver." This was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally, an Uber driver will just roll down the window and say your name, or some version of it, but always including your name. I think I just stared at him for a second, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in, and I ask him, "What's my name?" He immediately is enraged, and starts screaming about how he doesn't have time for this, and just to get in the car. I don't think I've ever sobered up so fast in my life. I'm completely panicking. Obviously, this wasn't my Uber. Quickly checking the license plate, I immediately see that it's not a match. Meanwhile, this guy is still screaming at me, and I have absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolt in either direction, this guy could easily outrun me or have a weapon. I'm also pretty sure at this point that if he's trying to nab a random girl off the street, he must have a weapon of some sort. I can't run back into the apartment door right behind me since it locks behind you, and I don't have the keys nor the time to unlock it. Running towards the back door would do nothing as well, as he's idling right by the mouth of the driveway towards the back parking lot, and again, I would have to take the time to find the right keys and get in. If I screamed, I'm not exactly in the type of neighborhood where someone would try to be a vigilante, and I can still hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment. I knew they wouldn't hear me. Also, it's 4 a.m. and absolutely no one is around. People talk a lot in the sub how they either sprint into action or freeze, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the absolute worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt that if I did, it would be the end of me. But if I kept standing there, staring in shock at this screaming man, the result would be the same. From when he started screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing only 20 seconds had passed by. Just as he's looking like he's getting ready to get out of the car, another black sedan pulls up right behind him. Checking the license plate as quickly as I can, I realize that it's my actual Uber, and I make a full sprint to the car. It's only like 6 steps, and I throw myself in, screaming at the real Uber driver, "What's your name?" The poor dude looks terrified, but responds with my name quickly, to which I reply, "Get me the heck out of here. That man is trying to kidnap me." If I was in this Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shy to react as quickly as he did. But my dude flew out of there, offered to call the cops for me, which I declined and now regret, and then walked me to the front door of my apartment, ensuring that I got inside safely. Truly, an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing that he got the fattest tip my college student bank account would allow for, although he deserved much, much more. So, to the man who ruined my sense of security and caused countless anxiety attacks when out in public for months, let's not meet. And although it took a while, I'm doing great now. Stay safe, y'all. This just occurred the past November. A close friend and I were on a fall break from college and decided to go to an ODESZA concert in downtown Chicago. We grew up in the suburbs, so going to Chicago to have fun was common for us. Anyways, we had a great time at the concert and decided to Uber home since we weren't close to the train station. My friend told me that Uber wasn't working for him at the moment, so I called the Uber. But this was literally my first time ever calling one, and I accidentally called an UberPool not knowing what it was. My friend saw that and was like, it doesn't really matter. So, the driver picks us up from right outside the concert venue. There were a lot of intoxicated people around, as one could imagine post-ODESZA concert. But we were pretty sober as all we did was smoke some weed, which we were used to. We get in the car and everything is going normal. But we did notice the direction the driver was taking us as we were wrapped up in talking about the show. It turns out, the driver was going to the south side of Chicago, which we realized after some time by looking at the maps. But our suburb was exactly the opposite direction of this lengthy drive south. We decided to attribute this to the fact that it was an UberPool, and I shrugged it off, until we picked up this next passenger. To be honest, this girl scared us. I don't like to judge people, but she scared us just by the looks and how she talked. Once the girl got in, we asked the driver where we were going first, to which he stopped answering. Next thing I know, my phone lit up and said the Uber trip was canceled. And for this duration of the ride, Uber had no record of me being in the car. I asked the driver what the deal was and he didn't answer. The girl and the driver 100% knew each other, as they were calling each other nicknames. The girl was being weird and seemed to be doing some type of hand signal to him. And then we proceeded to drive further south to this neighborhood, the sketchiest neighborhood I've ever seen. I didn't realize neighborhoods like this even existed. Every house was completely wrecked. There were no street signs on most streets. Most streetlights were out or flickering. Homeless people lying on the sidewalks, and there were beat-down warehouses and alleys. This was by far the scariest area I had ever seen. No one would care if they heard a scream in this area. Once we started seeing all of this, our hearts dropped because the driver would still not respond to us. My friend then looks over to me and whispers, "We need to get the heck out of here." To which I replied, "Dude, look where we are." And so, we stayed in the car. And then we get driven down this alley behind a warehouse where these streets ended, and there were just fields beyond it. The driver is going down this alley at like 2 miles per hour, but keeps going. The girl and the Uber driver were clearly discussing something serious, but we couldn't make it out since they were using mostly signals. At that time, our hearts sank even more and we literally both thought we were going to be killed in this alley, or at best, someone was going to get in the car and rob us. He stopped and the doors unlocked, and I was in complete shock with a pale face when all of a sudden, my friend says, "Hey, I'm completely sober, and I'm about to call 911. I'm assuming the driver was waiting around the concert to pick up some wasted people to allow this to happen, but we were pretty sober, in which he was serious about it. He had dialed 911 on his phone. The Uber driver looks back at us in shock after he sees 911 dialed, and my friend's finger about to push the call. He looks at the girl. The girl is in shock too, and she nods her head no. And she says, "What the heck, Rye?" And she gets out of the car. The driver then drives out of the neighborhood and onto the highway towards our suburb. All of a sudden, my Uber app gave me a notification saying that we were now on a ride. All of a sudden, the driver starts talking to us again, but he wasn't giving any answers, just saying that he's driving us home. We were asking what the heck had just happened, dude, but he wouldn't answer stuff like that. He would answer stuff about where we were going, but nothing about what just happened. We got home safely and reported the Uber driver for this ride, because it was obviously messed up. We think that the Uber driver was trying to wait for wasted people to call the pool, so he could get away with this, but realized that we were too big of a risk when it came time to do what they were going to do. We've accepted that we were a part of a mugging scheme, and got lucky that we decided not to get drunk at the concert. We had anxiety for weeks after this, but we now know just how sketchy some areas can be and how to be more safe in Chicago, and by not calling an UberPool outside a concert or a bar. It's so weird to me that people live this sketchy of lives and do this to people, but it was eye-opening. So, I was at a friend's house listening to some records on his vinyl player, smoking like animals and drinking as much. That night, we finished 2 bottles of Bacardi and a bottle of Horeca that I bought from some people in Ukraine. I lived close to him, like 10 minutes by car, and it was 4 a.m. One thing I can tell you about me is that I can hold my liquor. It's very hard to get me drunk. And I wasn't drunk, I was slightly buzzed, as we had took the entire afternoon to drink all that stuff. Well, I said, "Time to go home," and I called an Uber. A silver Renault Logan with an Uber logo made of LEDs inside the windshield. I went in and the dude looked sketchy from the beginning. He was probably between 20 and 40, and he had a cheap golden chain with an AK-47 on his neck. Brown darting eyes, a little overweight, close-cropped hair that was balding. His GPS was working just fine. He had to cross and get into a tunnel to get into my neighborhood, and then it would become another avenue, a turn to the right and driving 500 meters to get me home. But instead, the dude thought that I was drunk and couldn't know where I was. He turned into the avenue instead, and I thought the tunnel was under maintenance at that hour or something. At the time, even though I was alert, I thought it was all okay and that he would just take a detour. Instead of turning in the street in which he could take a detour for the alternative route, and his GPS was clearly pointing the direction, the dude started going to a complete different direction and going downtown, at an hour that only unsavory characters were there. I asked him where he was taking me. He didn't answer and he sped up the car. I asked him again, this time a bit more firmly, "Where the heck are you taking me?" He didn't answer again. Perhaps he thought that I was easy prey because he believed that I was drunk and because of my foreigner accent. Well, I'm not the kind of dude to be messed with. I quickly opened his glove compartment to see if he had any guns, and he didn't. When he looked at what I was doing, I grabbed my knife and I put it on his throat. I slashed it lightly just to show him that it was razor sharp. I told him, "You take me back or I'll do it." And then he spoke, quickly telling me that he was taking the wrong turn. A blatant lie. I told him that I didn't give a crap and that he would turn this car around and take me where I paid him to take me. He did it rather quickly, trembling like crazy. 20 minutes later, I arrived close to my destination, as I didn't want this weirdo to know exactly where I lived. By that point, his neck was bleeding, but not that much. I opened the door, told him to put on the app that I paid for the ride, and I told him to screw off. He quickly went away, and I reported him in the app. And that was it. Take care at night with Uber drivers, folks. You never know who's driving. And to the driver who tried to kidnap me, rob me, or do whatever, I hope the scar on your neck will always remind you of me. Let's not meet again. Ever. This happened last year at the peak of my partying stage. I was at a friend's house drinking, and at around 2 a.m., I was pretty drunk and decided to call an Uber to take me home. The car pulled up, and I have this habit of sitting at the front with the driver. He was a young man around mid to late 20s. I don't remember much about what we were talking about, but I do recall his compliment going from, "You're really pretty," to, "You're really hot." And he kept saying that I reminded him of his mom. I found it really strange, especially considering I was 19, but I tried to laugh it off because I didn't want to appear rude. I asked him to swing by the drive-thru at a burger spot because I was hungry. We got the food and he was supposed to take me home, but I noticed that he was driving literally the complete opposite way of where my house was. I looked at his map and it kept telling him to turn around, so I asked him where we were going, and I remember him looking over at me and saying, "Oh, you don't want to come over to my house?" I remembered that I completely sobered up and said, "No, please take me home." I don't recall if we continued talking after that, but luckily he took me home and I never heard from him again. I also reported him the next day. What really upsets me is that he clearly knew I was inebriated and tried taking advantage of me. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had never spoken up. It's safe to say that I won't be Ubering alone at night anymore. This happened a couple of months ago, in December of last year. I started working a new job in the mall and had to work for most of Boxing Day. I was done at 10 p.m. and transit seemed to have ended at 7 p.m. I'm a student who didn't go home for the holidays due to this job, and never had to deal with holiday transit hours. I decided to call an Uber and the driver picked me up right in front of the mall. We had a casual conversation during the drive back, and he learned about where I worked and how I'm living on my own for the time being, since my roommates went to their hometowns. Fast forward to the next day at work, around 6 p.m. This driver walks into the store and tries to strike a conversation with me, but I told him that I had to get back to work. He also asked if we could hang out later, to which I said no and left. At the end of that shift, at 10 p.m., I walked out of the store planning to take transit. As soon as I stepped out of the store, the driver immediately pulled up next to me and offered to give me a ride back home. After going back and forth with me declining and him saying it's free, I decided to walk away and I caught a bus home. I was pretty overwhelmed by the fact that he had showed up to my workplace and waited 3 hours until I was done working to offer me a ride home. I've reported this to Uber and they've notified me that they suspended this driver, provided me with a full refund, and gave me a link to provide to the police if I plan on filing a report. Silly of me to give away information like that to a stranger, but I hope that I never meet that driver again who appeared at twice my age, knows where I work and live. Lesson learned 110%. I don't have a car, so Uber Lyft is my main mode of transportation to get to work. This morning, I requested an Uber a half hour before I had to be there, and the pickup was supposed to be less than 5 minutes. But for some reason, my Uber driver kept going in circles. He ended up calling me asking for directions, and I was telling him exactly where he needed to go, and so was the GPS in the background. At that point, I was irritated and asked if there was a way that he could cancel because I was going to be late. He said that he couldn't and ended up finding his way to my apartment at the time that I was supposed to be at work. He kept apologizing and I would mumble, "It's fine, I just need to get there." He ended up taking me to another store that was on the way and asked, "This is it, right?" It took almost all of me not to just blow up. I calmly gave him the directions to the actual store that I work at, and just told him to please listen to the GPS. We finally get to my job and I'm nearly 20 minutes late. And as soon as he had parked, I muttered, "Thanks," and got out, and bolted to the office to clock in. An hour or so into my shift, one of my managers came up to me to tell me that my Uber driver had been harassing people in the front of the store, trying to get a hold of me, my manager, to take fault for me being late or apologize to me. You need a membership to shop there, so he kept getting kicked out. He tried 4 or 5 separate times to come in. Another hour goes by and a different manager approached me to let me know that the Uber driver had resorted to blowing up the store's phone, begging to speak to me. She had asked for me not to be left alone and to be on the lookout in case he came back. I contacted Uber support multiple times to let them know, and you want to know what they did about it? They gave me a $3 credit. I made sure to give him a 1-star rating so I wouldn't get him as a driver again. But it's just scary to think that he knows where I work and live.